The great American poet Maya Angelou said, she talked about haters, people who just would complain or say terrible things about her or not really accept her. And she said they're really jealous because of how successful and how many people admire her. She says they see my glory, but they don't know my story. Although I don't know if any teenager in America has gone through their high school reading program, they should know a bit of her story as is part of the reading. But what she's trying to get at is that without knowing what she had gone through in her life, you don't fully understand where she is. And the reason why I thought of that quote of hers is because I think in some ways Christians today have the same response sometimes. We see the glory of Christ and yet we're not always aware of the whole path that Jesus took to get there. And it kind of made me think, because we do know his story. We know the story of the cross. We know the story of his own, the trials and the suffering that he underwent and his teaching. We know all of those things, but I think that sometimes as Christians we don't realize that in order for us to follow Jesus into his glory, we have to follow that story ourselves and not just read about it and say, oh, that was so terrible. Oh, Jesus, I hope you can help me through. But really to be able to be open and enter into that story ourselves. And it was quite the providence of God that just yesterday in Mass we heard Jesus' condition for discipleship. If you want to be my disciple, you got to take up your cross and follow me. It's just, he was quite clear. There was a point that I made in my homilies yesterday. In Mark's account, when Jesus explains things, he either tells people what it is and then tells them not to say anything, or he explains stuff like in the house or apart. If you read over Mark's account, when Jesus explains something, it's all usually like in a closed place, or he tells people not to say anything about it. But yesterday, when Jesus talked about his passion and his death and his resurrection, Mark added a very small phrase. He spoke about this openly. And that's really like a stick of dynamite. Why did Mark do that? Because Jesus was trying to root his disciples and all who heard him in the action that he was going to do for the salvation of the world. And he wanted them to focus on imitating that, on being part of that. And so the center, or what draws us into the center of our relationship with Christ, is our ability to enter into the mystery of Christ's cross, and in so doing, into his resurrection. And if we find resistance, or in some cases we find some Christians who are surprised that the cross comes their way, to gently remind people that this is what Jesus was most open about in teaching his disciples, about how to find their way to new life and to the heavenly kingdom of his Father. And so this celebration stands before us as an invitation to radically place our discipleship centered on the paschal mystery of Jesus, his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. And everything else that flows from that is a grace. And that rooted in that paschal mystery, we unite our story with the story of Jesus, that we might one day also know his glory.